If you get a $10,000 fine, usually that wipes out the entire profits for that load. That could cost a driver maybe their entire profit for the month. You don't want to have to be put out of business for something that could have been avoidable.
Welcome to This Week in Trucking, the podcast that tells you what you need to know about the trucking market for the week. The story we've heard over and over again in the last 18 months has been this. The COVID trucking market drove too much capacity into the market. There's too many trucks on the road for the amount of freight that is available to haul, and people are struggling to stay in business under these conditions. It's true that there's still a pretty big spread between contract and spot rates. There are some signs that this is changing, but certainly not changing at the rate that we would like to see, and not enough to make a real difference for individual carriers. And something that we've been saying on this show, and even before we started this show, is that just because the market is down for most people doesn't mean it's down for everyone. And what I mean by that is that there are still plenty of people making sound, long-term decisions that help them position themselves for success in the long run. So one of the decisions that you can make as an owner-operator or a small fleet is to open yourself up to specialization. And that's why this week we're talking to Bolaji Ige, CEO and founder of OverDims, about how you can multiply the rate you're getting from brokers by accessing the $200 billion oversized freight industry. Thank you so much for being here, Bolaji.
Thank you so much for having me, Caroline.
I recently rewatched your presentation. It's available on YouTube, so we'll link that in the description here. And in your introduction, you glossed over your background in the trucking industry, saying that you had a combined 500,000 miles on the road in the US and 10 years of experience in the transportation and supply chain industry. First of all, you must have started when you were 12 years old, but can you talk about how you got into trucking?
So my experience in trucking has actually been more related to I started off my career in trucking as from a corporate perspective. So I have been working for the various Fortune 500 different companies across about the 10 years plus now. One of the biggest things, so working for companies who actually move like the construction equipments, your large equipments, and then actual transportation companies. And so that was actually how I got my start in the trucking industry. At the time, I worked for a factory where it was my job to be able to get the trucking companies who would move the construction equipment that we needed to be moved. And so that was my first inkling into, okay, what exactly does this process entail? And how do these businesses make money? And at the time, one of my biggest experiences was from the corporate side of the table. And so I wanted to be able to understand it better from the other side of the table. I was like, okay, as a mom and pop shop company, how do they make money? What does their business look like? What does their business model look like? And so that was what actually led me into starting my dispatching company. And as the CEO and running a dispatching company, I had drivers. And so that's where I got the over 500,000 miles on the road in terms of being able to be responsible for finding these loads, negotiating these loads, working hand in hand with my drivers up until from picking up of the load up until delivery of the load and getting paid, and then being present with them through that entire process and seeing from having that first-hand experience of how their businesses worked.
So you were working on the corporate side, then decided to come over to the other side of the table, let's say. So being the customer first, and now on the other side of the table as the carrier, in this case through dispatching. What is something you learned about the difference between those two areas of work? So how do those two types of companies make decisions differently?
The first thing that comes to mind, especially from a big company perspective compared to your smaller business, who's the trucking company moving the trucks, one of the first things that come to mind is flexibility. As a bigger company, the ability to be able to choose and make a decision on the fly, to change routes, those decisions are they're way more stringent. As opposed to as a smaller business, you have the opportunity to be able to determine, okay, today I want to move this freight, or today I want to be able to move for this customer as opposed to moving for this other customer. And in a bigger company, you don't have that level of flexibility. It has to go through several levels of approvals and iterations and redlining and bureaucracy. As opposed to as a smaller business, you get the opportunity to be able to decide your own future, so to say. You can make a decision and say, today, let's go ahead and see if we can move X type of freight, which is different from the type of freight that I moved yesterday. And you're able to move forward, quickly do a test. Hey, did I like it? Did I not like it? Okay, maybe I didn't like it. So let's go back to what we did yesterday. Oh, yes, I like this. Okay, so let's keep on moving forward with this direction. You're able to make these decisions way quicker than in a bigger company.
I think you've just hit on the core reason why so much of the trucking industry is moved by small companies. Because in the logistics space, sure, you have a lot of things that are planned, and they're planned out very minutely, every mile, every decision. But there's also all kinds of freight that needs to be moved, oh my God, tomorrow. So, and a bigger carrier might not have the flexibility to be able to pick that up. A smaller carrier will have that flexibility to say, yep, at this price, here you go, I can do it. And that's pretty much why the spot market exists, right?
Yeah, that is the real, that is hitting the nail on the head. The spot market exists to be able to fill in these gaps, especially when we talk about the differences with our bigger companies who typically tend to have these contracts. And the contracts usually maybe on average last for 1 year. In some, depending on the size of the company, we're looking at 3 to 5 year long contracts for certain routes. But then as a business, you wake up one day and realize, oh my God, we have run out of parts. We need to get this part in yesterday. Who do you call? You call the smaller company that has the flexibility to be able to fill in on the fly.
You said that it's worth $200 billion last year, so 2023, and is growing by almost 5% every year. So when you talk about oversized freight, I usually think of things that I've seen on the road when I'm out on the highway. So things like prefab homes or wind turbines. What is oversized freight?
When I talk of oversized freight, I'm referring to, I would say, I guess I'll preface this and say, first of all, we have oversized and overdimensional. Those two words are usually used interchangeably, right? Because oversized or overdimensional freight is any freight that is bigger than the typical size on that one is considered a regular size freight. So if it exceeds the standard legal limits for width or height or weight, it's considered oversized or overdimensional. So most of the ones that we usually see are like your construction equipment. So like your excavators, your bulldozers, your cranes, specifically, especially in the South where we have a lot of construction going on, especially during the summer. And then you see your farm equipment, so like your tractors, which are the ones we usually tend to see maybe in the Midwest area. And then we also have things like generators, which we see in a lot of, I would say, we usually see a lot of generators. We tend to see these and like HVAC units in like industrial, like construction locations, and then military equipment. But I think some of the probably maybe the most fun ones are like some of the boats and the yachts, and you get to see these super yachts being moved, and you're like, okay, I want to meet the owner. So, but yeah, so those will probably be the most common. And then sometimes we tend to see like the actual bridge girders, which is like parts of bridges being moved. So those are also, especially depending on the season, you tend to see these with the construction equipment as well.
Got it. So it has mostly to do with big industry, construction. Now, I know that we recently saw a pretty big bipartisan bill go through last year, I think, about infrastructure, right? The Inflation Reduction Act. Is that something that you're seeing come to fruition now in trucking? Are you seeing a lot more growth there because of that infrastructure work that's funded by the federal government?
One of the things that I would say is, while we are seeing some uptick, so, for example, in certain states like Louisiana, I've seen an increase in construction and like road and bridge improvements, those certain projects. I think more of the increase or the uptick that we're seeing now is still more on the administrative side. So we're still seeing here's the bids are just going out, the processes to be able to get this in place. So I do think that by next year, by the end of this year, by next year is where we will see that higher increase with the actual beginning to take place, and
Right.
then we'll be able to then see the real increase, especially in supply, or rather, in supply of, or no, in demand of trucking companies that are needed to be able to fulfill these needs.
The difference between a regular spot market rate for a dry van load, let's say, a couple days ago I saw it was around $2.17 per mile in the Midwest, and an oversized load, which can go $7, $8, sometimes $12, $15 a mile, that difference is enormous. Why isn't everyone and their best friend signing up to get a trucking company and haul oversized freight in this business? What have you heard from carriers? Why aren't more people not doing this?
The biggest thing that I've heard is due to, one, I would say is due to lack of knowledge. There is a huge downside. Like, yes, we talk about you can make 5 times more by hauling oversized freight. You can make more than 5 times more by hauling oversized freight. However, you can also lose the shirt on your back if you do it the wrong way. I've heard carriers, I had a specific carrier who I ran into and was talking with, and they mentioned to me that they got a fine for $36,000. One load, like they got pulled over by the DOT, ended up with a $36,000 fine, incorrect permits, and personally, I think there were other things going on there, but typically, on average, your incorrect permit filing can run a carrier anywhere from $10,000 to $12,000, maybe $15,000 in fines or in fees, depending on what states they get that fine in. And
that's like a tow bill.
Exactly.
That's like getting your truck towed.
Yes. But one of the other things that we've seen is that if you get a $10,000 fine, usually that wipes out the entire probably profits for that load. Sometimes that could cost a driver maybe their entire profit for the month. In the case of the driver that had the $36,000 fine ticket, he mentioned that he was going to have to sell his company in order to be able to afford to pay this bill. Like, he would have to sell his truck. He's an owner-operator, only has one truck. So if he sells the truck, he's basically been put out of business because of this fine. And so that is the reason why a lot of truck drivers are usually hesitant to move over dimension freight, because if they do it the wrong way, they don't have the right permits. If they don't pay attention to all the things that are required in order to be able to move the oversized loads, they run the risk of losing out on a huge amount of money as well.
And we talk a lot about profitability on this show, and some people might point out that, sure, the rate per mile is much higher, but not only is the risk of a huge fine always there, but everything about running oversized freight is also more expensive. So it takes more fuel. It requires additional insurance most of the time. It puts more wear and tear on your truck, on your tires. It always requires special permitting.
Yes.
And it might require even additional training or a more experienced driver who knows how to move freight like that. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, do carriers hauling these loads really able to make more profit per mile? How much more have you seen carriers make?
So the carriers hauling these loads usually are able to make more profit per mile, because ultimately the best way that I've seen carriers who make profits, the best way I've seen them be able to do this is to be able to make sure things like your permits, for example, are taken into consideration. So I'm going to do a quick plug here and say, for example, using our app or our website, if you go on overdims.com, you're able to get a quote for your route in 30 seconds or less. What this means is that now you know how much it's going to cost you for this route and for your oversized load. So for example, if you go on the website, let's say you are talking about a spot market, you go on one of the load boards, you see a route, it tells you the dimensions of the load, it tells you the pickup and the drop-off location. You put all of that into the OverDims app, and you are able to get a quote and know how much it's going to cost you. In addition to knowing how much it's going to cost you, we also tell you, one, do you need an escort? What type of escort do you need? So do you need a civilian escort, or do you need a police escort, and how many do you need, and then how many do you need per state, so that you're able to have all these costs upfront. The best way that I've seen for drivers who are actually profitable is take this cost and they also pass it along to the broker or to the customer that they're running for. They tell them, hey, this is the cost of my permits, and you're able to just take that cost, and then before you then factor in the cost of you actually running your business. So to ensure that you are able to still make your profits and you're able to make sure this load is worth your time. But without having that, knowing that cost up front, it's harder, and then that's when you see carriers who then tend to run at a loss.
So can you give us a step-by-step process of how to get into oversized freight business? So say I'm a carrier, I'm listening to this conversation, I'm thinking, all right, I can get $12 a mile, even if it is significantly more expensive. Maybe it's 3 times as expensive. It's still going to be worth it to me. I'm still going to make more in profit off of a load like this. So how do you find loads? And then once you get those loads, how do you make sure that you have everything that you need for them?
So that is a very great question that I often have a lot of carriers ask. The first thing that I would say is, before you even think about moving an oversized load, the first question you need to ask yourself is, do you have the right equipment? Because if you have a dry van, there's no way you're going to be able to move or carry the oversized loads that for in general. So you need to make sure that you have the right size of truck. You need to make sure you have the right size of trailer. That is the very first step. Without this, you cannot move forward. Now, the next step is to then be able to say, okay, yes, I have the right equipment. Yes, I have a RGN, or yes, I have a step deck as a type of trailer, or yes, I have whatever type of truck. Now, what is the next step? So now, where do you find the loads? I would say the next step would be dependent on where you are. So let's say you are a driver out of Texas. It tells me that, especially in Texas, there's usually construction, but one of the beauty of the weather of Texas is that there's usually construction, most likely typically tends to be year-round. Assuming, for example, you're in the Midwest, that tells me, okay, there's going to be a lot of farming, so which means you're going to be looking at a lot of farm equipment. And so my next recommendation would be to be able to contact or know Google, literally just go on Google, use whatever your search engine is, to be able to determine what are the companies that move this type of freight in your state. That will be your next step, and then you start calling on them to be able to get these as direct customers. Now, assuming you don't want to go through all this, that's fine. Go on the load boards. Any load board, pick your favorite one, from the DA truck stop to, I think there's some oversized load boards now. Pick your favorite one. Any of them would work. Go on there, and then you're able to filter specifically for your truck type or for your trailer type. Then be able to call the brokers and move on from there. But I think more importantly than all of these, because it's easy, you can call the broker and say, hey, and then they can give you the load. But you also have to ask yourself, do you have the skills necessary? In a lot of the DOT handbooks, in a lot of the DOT, so for various states, they actually have guidance on how to tie your loads to your truck. These are the little details that you have to make sure you are aware of, so that you're reducing your risk of getting those high ticket fines if you do get pulled over for whatever reason. You have to make sure that you have the skill set necessary. Do you know how to back up or reverse the step deck when you have an oversized load on your truck? Because it's usually, depending on the load, especially if it's an over width load, there's no visibility. Do you know how to do that? You have to be able to make sure you have these extra skills, so that once you do get that load, you are ready to go. And then finally, the final thing that matters here is making sure that you are aware that you need permits. One of the things that you gotta love about the trucking industry, that every single state has its own permitting requirements. So, like everything else in the trucking industry being fragmented, so is the permitting process. What that says, or what that really means, is that you can have 2 states You can have two neighboring states. So let's give a Mississippi and Tennessee, for example. They share a border. There are people who live across one border and work in the other. The funny thing, if you have to be able to get a permit to cross both states, you cannot get a Tennessee permit and then expect that would cover you once you cross the Mississippi border. You have to be able to understand and identify what are the permit requirements for each state based on the dimensions of the load that you have, and then do you get the permits for that, for those states that you're going to be crossing. These are the major things you have to make sure. So think of it as a checklist. If you, I can actually have the linked at the end of this presentation. We have a checklist that we usually recommend to especially new carriers who are new to moving over dimension freight, or even if you're a pro, just so that you can have that as one of your checklists additional checklists of things to do before you get on the road. Make sure you walk yourself through each one of those to make sure that you have all these items complete before you're ready to move, and that would help reduce your risk of getting those high fines that we talked about earlier.
It's our own permitting process. They also have their own costs. So depending on how many states you're going through, that can be a multiple of the cost for permitting, right?
Yes.
Can you show us what it looks like to get all of those permits quoted on OverDims?
Sure.
Cool.
So here is what the OverDims app or web app currently looks like. So one of the things that I really love about this is the simplicity. So you can go in here and select your state. So if you give me a random state.
Let's say we're going from Michigan to Texas. I'm going to come and visit you.
So let's start. So give me a city.
Traverse City.
Okay. So we pick a city. I'm currently in Houston, Texas. So let's go with Texas and Houston as our destination. One of the things that I love is that you can find the zip codes. You can, to be fair, especially because I know on the load boards, you may not know your delivery zip code. So you're able to fine tune and provide an additional address once you have that information from the broker. So now for load length, especially because we do this in inches, so we put here, so let's use 700 inches. And then for load width, we can use something like 130. For load height, we can use 170 inches. And for load weight, we can use 115,000 pounds. So the load weight being the total weight between the freight and the truck. So as we know, the total weight legal limit is 80,000 pounds. So this is about 35,000 pounds over. And so now this specific load that we just did, we are running for a load that is both oversized and overweight. And if any of you are timing this, you can go ahead and time it. It is probably...
It's loading.
Yes. While we see the screen spinning, you can have your time on. The goal here is to make sure that this is 30 seconds or less, and that in 30 seconds or less, you would be able to get a quote for your route and be able to provide that. And look at that. Before I got done with my sentence, we have our available routes. So one of the best things that I love here is we actually tell you how many permits you need. So according to our online routing platform, there are two different routes. The first route gives you an option where you would go through only 5 states. So then you would need only 5 permits. Or the next route gives you an option where you go through 6 states, and then you would need 6 permits instead. So let's assume we pick the 6 states route because your family lives in Illinois and you would like to be able to drive through Illinois and see them while you are visiting. So now we pick this, and as you can see here, this next screen shows you your route cost. So it tells us that for the specific route that we chose and for the specific weights that we chose, apparently through all of these, there are 0 police escorts needed and 0 civilian escorts needed. It also tells us that this load, based on all the dimensions, is not considered a super load. So as a really quick plug in, super loads are loads that usually start from 250,000 pounds in weight, and those ones usually require bridge analysis by the different states. But one of the other things that I really love that our app also does is that it tells you how many miles you're expecting to travel within each of these states. And so it also tells you any additional fees is required for these states. And so, for example, we can see here that for the state of Michigan, your cost is $50 and there are no additional fees for the state of Michigan. However, for example, for the state of Illinois, they charge you an additional credit card fee of 2.25% of your total cost. So then, it gives you that number, so you don't need to do math. You don't need to, worry about, oh my God, what is 2.25%? We do all that math for you. The state of Missouri, it charges you a 2% credit card fee in addition to a 25-cent transaction fee. We break all of this down for you, so you have that information. Now, for this route and the dimensions that we chose, this tells us that this route has a total cost of $1,241. Now, this is a total estimated cost. One of the biggest things I want to point out here is that it also includes a $99 OverDims filing fee, which is what we see here as your service cost. However, depending on what plan that you have, this number will differ. So if you have for example, if you really did have a gold tier plan, and you had a free permits included, because our gold plans tend to include a certain number of permits included, then this would actually be a $0 cost and not $100, but $0. The other thing I want to point out here is that this additional 10% hold tends to drop off once we've actually filed the permit for you. This hold is depending on whether or not if there's a variation between the state fees and what our app is showing. But if there's no variation, then this whole fee tends to drop off and you would not see that fee. So your total cost, depending on what plan that you have with OverDims, could actually be somewhere less $200.
So however, it could be about $1,000,
yes,
between $1,000 and $1,200, depending on your plan with OverDims.
Yes, and that is correct. And one thing that I typically tend to recommend to my drivers is to go ahead and use this total number here when you're providing your bid to the broker or your bid to the customer or whoever, to be able to make your bid for a load, because what you don't want is to give them the lower number and then we end up needing this additional 10% hold and now you are out of money. So I tend to recommend to my drivers, go ahead and give them this total number here. If we don't need it, then it's an additional profit for you, and it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Definitely. And so now the next step would be for you to then go ahead and to file your permits. So one of the things that we do, we take all this information, because this is information that is required by the state. I think one of the best parts is our pride on efficiency. So by getting all this information from you upfront, which is your driver's license info, your truck license info, registration, trailer license plate, type trailer states, number of axles, what is the gross axle weight for your trailer. By getting all this information, we're able to skip the back and forth. We don't need to call you on the phone to say, hey, we know you just put in a request for a permit. Okay, now we need to know what type of truck you drive. Okay, now what is the number of axles? This is all the information that is needed by the state. The best part of this that I also love is that if you had to file this information, if you had to file your permit by yourself, you would have to go every state. So we identified 6 states in this route. You would have to go 6 different times to each of these states' websites to go and type in all this information manually. However, the beauty of using OverDims is that it's one and done. All you have to do is fill this information out once. Also, by actually creating an account, really just have to fill it out once, because you don't have to keep typing it each time you need to request for a permit. We save your information, so you're able to just pull back up the information that is already saved on your profile and be able to have that information so you can breeze through all of this, and you would end up coming up on the review page, which allows you to be able to review all the information for accuracy and then hit submit for us to be able to file that permit for you. The biggest thing also that I would mention here is that I have a lot of customers today for OverDims who don't actually use OverDims to file their permits, and so just use OverDims for the convenience of being able to get that quote. Because they're like, oh, I can file my permit myself, I can take that time, and I like to learn, I like to be hands-on, and that is very great. But I think one of the biggest things that I found is that a lot of customers love is the efficiency. The ability to be able to get that quote in 30 seconds or less is unmatched in the market today. And that opportunity allows you to be more competitive and beat out your competition in order to get your bid in to your customers or to your broker, whoever, quicker than your competition. Difference is what makes all the difference in whether or not you get that load or not.
Definitely. And I can imagine where even just being able to tell a broker, all right, give me the details about the load. I'm thinking about it. Okay, I can see here I'm probably going to spend about $1,200 on permits. That already positions you as somebody who really knows what they're talking about, right?
And one of the other things that I love about moving oversized freight, or even just having that information at the tip of your hands, is the ability to show your customer, so whether it's the broker or your direct customer, the ability to show to them that you are prepared. It means they don't have to wait, because today the other options are, one, you can take the 3 hours going through each individual state's website to say, okay, let's go to Michigan, let's go to Missouri, let's go to Illinois. You can take that 3 hours time to be able to go through each one of these, or you can have this information at the tip of your finger, and now they're wondering, wow, how did they know this? And you automatically come across as a pro. You come across as an expert in your field, and they're more likely to trust you because you were able to provide them this information up front.
Totally. And I can imagine where oversized freight probably requires a little bit more trust and relationships with your customers than regular spot market freight does.
Yes, I have had a situation where a driver, thankfully not one of the OverDims drivers, but the driver, so the OverDims driver was required to come and take over a load from another driver, because the load and the truck over in the middle of the interstate. And obviously the broker was not happy. This then became an emergency situation for the OverDims customer driver to then try and get a new permit to go and replace this driver and picking up the load in the middle of the side of the road interstate. But one of the biggest things is things like that, while I would say they happen, probably not as much as they should, but they happen. And things like that are where you tend to see the inexperience of drivers. And so as a broker or as a customer who is moving these types of freight, because usually on average as well, your oversized freight is usually probably worth more than your regular type freight. Let's take a super yacht, for example. The super yachts run anywhere from 500 to 1 million and above in cost. So you are not going to have a super yacht tipping over on the middle of the interstate. You would do everything possible to be able to vet the drivers who you're going to allow to move that load. And so it does require an extreme level of trust, and you being able to set yourself apart by showcasing your preparedness, showcasing your taking the initiative to have all this information handy. All of that all just does is it builds more trust in you as a carrier, as opposed to somebody who is less prepared, who is less knowledgeable about the space.
Absolutely. This is a great tool for carriers, I think. If you're interested, we'll leave a link in the description so you can check out OverDims. Can you talk about a little bit about the different plans that you have for different types of companies? Is it different prices per number of trucks that you've got or number of permits? Can I get quotes for free?
That would be nice. But the one thing that I will say, so our OverDims plans today can be found on overdims.com/pricing as your basis for our different plans. What we are currently doing is today, it is actually not dependent on the company size, except you have 20 trucks and above, and then we do a custom quote for you. But if not, if you have anything less than 20 trucks, which is usually most of our customers tend to have about 10 trucks and below. So for these companies, I think any of our regular plans work perfectly. So these are the current plans today. We have the day pass, we have the bronze tier, we have our silver tier, which actually is our most popular option, and we have our gold tier. So I will talk about that. The reason why the silver is our most popular option is because One, it comes with 3 free permits included with your subscription. Outside of the day pass, which by virtue of the name day pass, so the day pass, you get 24 hours access. Usually if you start at about 2:44 p.m. today, by 2:43 p.m. tomorrow, it would be cut off. Your access would be, you no longer have access to the system. But also, one of the biggest things I tell people is that you, for example, just want to run only one quote, or let's say you only want to run 2 quotes or something, I usually recommend get the bronze tier, because with the bronze tier, your permit, assuming you do choose to use OverDims to file your permit, with the bronze tier, you're filing that permit for less than $100. Opposed to with the day pass, you file your one permit for about $150, and between that and the cost of the fee for the day pass, you might as well have just bought the bronze tier. And now with the bronze tier, one of the benefits also is that you get to have this for the entire month. So it's not just this price for one day like the day pass is, but you get this access for the entire month. Now, one thing that I will also talk about is that for any of our monthly tiered plans, so which is our bronze, silver, or gold, you get your first 5 days for free. So which means you can run as many quotes to your heart's content as you would like in those first 5 days, and you will not be charged. So when you try to sign up on the website, we don't charge you for the first 5 days. And now if you decide for some reason that, you know what, this is day 3, maybe I'm just not liking OverDims as much as I thought I would, you can cancel and no questions asked, you don't get charged. That's it. We go our separate ways. However, I know you would love OverDims. You're more likely to stay. But then, especially because what I found is that especially for the customers who tend to specialize in over-dimension freight movements, they move about an average of 1 overload per week. If you're moving an average of 1 per week, that tells me that in a month, you need at least 3 to 4 permits. That's the reason why most of our customers like the silver tier, because with the silver tiered plan, you get 3 permits for free included in your cost. And so maybe at most you have to pay for the cost of filing only 1 additional permit. But if not, usually for this fee, you get all your permits filed, like you get your 3 free permits filed for you, and you can have as many quotes as possible during the month as you would like. Something that I will also do, for our special listeners of the show today, I will give Caroline a special unique discount code to where you are able to get 15% off your subscription fee if you use this discount code, and that would be a permanent 15%. So for as long as you keep your account active with us, your price will be kept at this 15% discount.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Bolaji. That is a huge plus for our listeners, and I hope all of our customers are doing this and making more money for their businesses, because that is what we want at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Bolaji, if you were to give any advice to newer carriers thinking about doing oversized freight, what is the most important thing that you would tell them?
The most important thing that I would tell any new carrier is, honestly, outside of get OverDims, download the OverDims app, make it your best friend. Outside of that, it would be make sure you understand your permits. At the end of the day, you do not want to lose track of your revenue because you lost it to a DOT fine. You don't want to have to be put out of business for something that could have been avoidable. And the biggest ways are, the State Department is not trying to trick you. On your permit documents on each of their state websites, they have, now it's about 80 pages long, but they have all the requirements that they want to see in a permit. And so if you make yourself comfortable, sure that whichever state that you live in, that the permit website or the permit handbook from that state becomes your best friend. That would be my one advice, is make sure you familiarize yourself with all the permit requirements in your state or in the states that you will be running with. I recommend, obviously, I'm biased, but I recommend OverDims because one thing we also do is when we give you that permit, when we file your permit for you, we point out the typical areas where trucking companies tend to get tripped up so that we make sure you are aware. So we give you a one-page summary of the 5-page summary that the State Department provides you so that you have that, all your most important bullet points on your first page, so you have that information. But if you decide, oh, OverDims is not for me, that's great. But my one advice to you would be make sure you familiarize yourself with the permits because it's the difference between a profit and going out of business.
Yeah, definitely. All right, to close out, I'm going to show you something. So I went to the Upper Peninsula in Michigan over the weekend, and I went to their historical center, which was very fun. It's this little town in the middle of the wilderness. It's outside of Marquette, Michigan, which is the largest city in the Upper Peninsula, but it's still not that large of a city. And in the early 20th century, there was a mining company working in Negaunee, and it had drilled so much beneath the town that it started sinking in. The whole town was sinking in, and houses were starting to sink into the earth, and so they were going to either have to get rid of the house, raise the houses and the churches, school, everything there, or they gave residents an option: either we'll raise your house and we'll buy you a new one across town, or we can move your house for you. So I was thinking about this because I thought, I'm going to talk to Bolaji this week and I'm going to have the best oversized freight store to share with her. So I'm going to try and look up some pictures of this. So it was in the 1940s, I think, moving houses across town. If I can.
I'm going to have to look this up. That actually sounds really cool.
It was crazy. We're going to try and find some pictures of this, but there were literally tractors that would pull entire houses not like prefab homes, not mobile homes.
With the vision and everything.
They would raise them up and put them on a flatbed. And I just wanted to I should have snapped a picture of it and sent it to What the Truck with the strap work because it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. So we'll find some pictures of it and we'll show it, and I'll send you some photos of it. But it was a crazy story, and it just made me think, what kind of permit would you need nowadays to move an entire 3-story, 4-bedroom house across town?
The beauty of it is that it is still the same process. It has a length, it has a width, it has a height, and it has a weight. So as far as you know those 4 dimensions, you can get a permit for it.
There you go. That's all you need. It's that simple. It is that simple. All right, Bolaji, thank you so much for joining us today. We were really excited to talk to you. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about oversized freight and how carriers can make more money for their businesses, because that's what we want. We want people to be able to be more profitable and spread those gains across their communities. That is what we're all about, supporting those small businesses. So thank you so much, Bolaji, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for having me. Talk to you later.